To get a sense of the state of play in the war between Russia and Ukraine, we're joined for a global perspective at this time by Dakota Wood, Senior Research Fellow for Defense Programs at the Heritage Foundation in the United States, joining us from Washington, D.C. We have Edward Lucas, author, security specialist, joining us from London. We have General N.C. Vij, former Chief of the Indian Army Staff, joining us for India's perspective on this hostility between these two countries. Hannah Shelest joins us, Editor-in-Chief at Ukraine Analytica from Kiev in Ukraine. Alexander Bretsky joins us from Moscow in Russia. So we have Washington, D.C., we have Kiev, we have Delhi, we have London and Moscow, covering different types of perspectives in this special broadcast. And I want to go across first to Dakota Wood on what President Biden could do from here. There's a report in the International Wires of America once again trying to form consensus on more severe sanctions against President Putin and against the Russian government. How soon could that happen? And do you think that will in any way deter President Putin, because he's gone in all guns blazing, doesn't seem to care very much for what the rest of the world plans to do against him?
Yeah, I don't think the sanctions are going to shape President Putin's behavior at all. I mean, he has made a terrific gamble or statement to this invasion. And once you've pulled that trigger, literally and figuratively, a sanction isn't going to cause him to withdraw his forces. However, it is important for the world, for Western civilization, for the United States, to do everything that they can. And these sanctions, cutting Russia off from the international banking financial transfer system, SWIFT, stopping sales, or at least the purchase of Russian energy, would all be very significant statements. Unfortunately, on the U.S. side, it has been very reactive or reactionary to Putin's moves. So I think that this is a door that is already open, that there is great consensus that more needs to be done, and we're waiting for the White House to take those steps. So right now, it's been rather incremental and tepid. That needs to be much more severe. That carries risk. Cyber attacks against infrastructure and those sorts of things, cutting off energy to Europe, which has become critically dependent on Russian energy. But these things have to happen. And this is an unwarranted invasion, the attack of innocent Ukraine, and the world needs to speak out.
Okay, I want to get a word in also from Hannah Shelest in Kiev in Ukraine. We're seeing two different kinds of reports. One suggesting that the Ukrainian army is pushing back against the Russian invasion hard. The other showing images of immense devastation as Russian aircraft and tanks pound civilian buildings and infrastructure. You're in Kiev. Can you give us your sense of how much in control the Ukrainian government is at this moment, and how long do you see the Ukrainian army being able to hold off against the scale of the force that they're facing?
First of all, I would like to clarify, I'm not in Kiev now, but in Odessa, on the south of the country, and just an hour ago we heard very severe shelling here as well. But the main battle now happening is definitely in Kiev, Chernihiv, and Kharkiv, that is on the north of the country. First of all, definitely you saw many pictures this morning from the Russian shelling of the civilian buildings just in downtown Kiev. That is happening, and most of these shelling are happening from the long-range missiles, approximately 400 kilometers. At the same time, those forces that are coming at Ukrainian territory, they are heavily beaten, and there are already plenty of information in the open sources with the reports up to 500 tanks, the Russian tanks that are broken, 10 airplanes, plenty of helicopters. The groups that have been trying to reach the towns, they are arrested or beaten or captured, depending how it's happening. Both by the armed forces, security services, and by the regular citizens. There are plenty of videos now how in Kiev the saboteurs that have been sent being captured just by the people on the streets in their buildings, for example, when those guys tried to reach the roofs of the building. And the assault is happening at the same time in many, many directions. So the situation is changing each 30 minutes, literally each 30 minutes. But from what we have now, the Russian armed forces are quite demoralized. because they have not expected such a strong resistance from the Ukrainian side. And many of them, at least those that have been captured by our armed forces and now are war prisoners, they are like reporting that they were told they are sent for exercises. So the Russian generals were even so unfair that couldn't tell to their soldiers that they are sent to war.
You know, we've heard a Ukrainian perspective. Let's get a perspective from Moscow. Alexander Bratetsky joins us. The word coming out from the Ukrainian government is that we're holding out. President Zelensky's government claims more than 1,000 Russian soldiers have been killed and that the assault is going far slower than the Russian army would have anticipated. Sitting in Moscow, is that your sense as well, or how do you see Russia being able to execute this order of battle? Is it going according to plan in your view?
Well, I think definitely things might not go as planned by the Russian military. And of course, the Ukrainian soldiers are brave. They're actually from the same military school as Russians. And they've been very brave warriors in the Soviet armed forces, and they are known for this. However, I would not trust all the stuff that they're coming both from the Russian side and Ukrainian side, because that's a propaganda war waged by countries in the middle of the war. For example, there are just a news coming from the leader of the Russian Duma, the parliament, Mr. Vyacheslav Volodin, who has said that Mr. Zelensky has left Ukraine. I don't subscribe to this view, but we need to confirm this. Mr. Zelensky, being a former actor, has shown his bravery and have become sort of a commander-in-chief, a real commander-in-chief, and he is with his country. But I think that Mr. Zelensky will leave, and if he will leave or ask for political asylum, if that happens, then Ukrainian army will stop fighting, because every army, when they commander-in-chief, or they're killed in battle or leaving, it's actually the end of day. So we have to wait and see what actually Putin's plans for Ukraine, because he's sending very conflicting messages. First of all, he's saying that he wants negotiations, right? And secondly, he said he would not negotiate with a bunch of Nazi, which is actually exaggerating comment. Ukraine does have far-right missionaries and far-right stuff, but far-right people, but they are not dominating the Ukrainian landscape right now. So that's the situation is very complicated. We have to see how things on the ground will actually in a couple of days. If there is a talk for negotiations, if they sit on the table, the war might be finished with certain conditions for both sides. If not,
security specialist Edward Lucas joins us from London. Alexander Bretsky making a very important point that the Ukrainian army is likely to fight till the time President Zelensky stays in charge. If he flees, and we're already seeing MPs in Russia at least put that out, and a lot of it could just be PSYOP, psychological warfare, information operation that's currently on. What's your reading of the military state of play? How long can President Zelensky stay in control?
I think he's willing to stay to the end, and I think that the rumors that the Russian lie machine is spreading about him departing are just that. They're trying to undermine Ukrainian morale, but Ukrainian morale is incredibly high. And I do want to correct what you said at the beginning. I don't think there's hostilities between Russia and Ukraine. This is Russia attacking Ukraine. Ukrainians don't have anything against Russia. This is an entirely unprovoked attack against a peaceful country that just was trying to develop in its own way, when Russia can't tolerate democracy on the doorstep. That's the real problem here. And I think now Putin's got a really serious problem. I'm wondering if Russian soldiers who were told that they were going to fight a bunch of Nazi drug addicts, just a Western puppet state which was had no backing from the population, when they find they're actually having to gun down grannies in the street and kill people just like them, people who also are native Russian speakers, just have different passports and different dreams of the future. I wonder if the Russian soldiers are going to put up with that. I wonder if they might desert, or even mutiny, or switch sides. So I think Putin has bitten off more than he can chew. The price is absolutely terrible. The danger is colossal. I see real dangers of this escalating. It's not going to be contained just within Ukrainian borders. I think it's going to spread into other parts of Europe as well. So it's a terribly dangerous situation. But this is all of Putin's making. Never forget that. And it could end really badly for Putin. We may be seeing this as the beginning of the end of the Putin regime if he really gets it wrong.
I've just received information from Moscow that a clarification has been put out by the Russian government on the image which is on your screen of this missile projectile that crashed into a building in Kiev. Russia is calling this a failure of the missile guidance system of the Ukrainian Buk M1, claiming it resulted in a missile hitting the corner of a residential building. Because this one image of massive residential complexes being targeted really sending chill across the world, because is Russia really going to be attacking civilian populations? They're now saying that this is a failure of the missile guidance system. Edward Lucas, do you buy that at all? Or is this really part of Russia's attempt to control the narrative globally and to make it seem as if they're not really gunning for civilians, and that's why they're calling this a failure of the missile guidance system?
Well, I think if you look at the history of this, Russia shot down a passenger airline with hundreds of casualties, the Malaysian airliner that was flying quite peacefully over Ukraine, and the Russian-backed rebels shot that down with the Russian anti-aircraft missile, and Russia's still lying about it. They're still saying, oh, maybe the plane didn't exist, or it had dead bodies on board, or it was a NATO stunt or something. So Russia has and obviously in war, information's always very confusing. But the fact is, Ukraine would be at peace if it was not for the Russian attack. And whether this is a Russian missile hitting an apartment block, or maybe indeed a Ukrainian anti-aircraft missile that went astray, those missiles would not be fired if Russia hadn't attacked. Putin decided to attack Ukraine, and he has the blood of hundreds of people on his conscience for that. And we in the West, I have to say, we are responsible too, because we had so many opportunities to stop Putin. We were warned so many years back, even back in the 1990s, people were warning us about the direction that Russia was taking, and we were ignorant and arrogant and naive and complacent, and actually most of all greedy. We preferred to make money from servicing the Russian regime and its dirty money rather than standing up to it. And since the occupation of Crimea and the war in Ukraine in 2014, which is 8 years ago, 14,000 Ukrainians are dead. And their deaths and the deaths of the people dying now are on the conscience of the West and of the international community. And can I also say how sad I was to see India, the largest democracy in the world, siding with China, the largest dictatorship in the world, at the United Nations Security Council. And if I was
counter that to say India is not really siding with China. If you know anything about India and China, the last thing India would ever do is to side with China.
Well, you were both abstaining, sir, in the
same way as the United States very often sides with Pakistan, even though publicly they say all kinds of things against Pakistan. India will do, and I want to go across to General N.C. Vij, the former chief of the Indian Army Staff, what India's national security dictates, and what people like Mr. Lucas and others in DC think doesn't matter quite as much with respect to their opinion, because very often as Western powers take positions on matters of the South Asian continent, on issues like terrorism, which India seems to think are totally off. Now, General Vij, questions being asked about India's position on the Russian invasion of Ukraine, where India hasn't come out and clearly condemned the Russian invasion, and people like Edward Lucas rightly asking questions about why India is shying away from condemning an invasion when it's clearly wrong.
Well, Rahul, thank you very much for having me on your show. You see, it is a very difficult question for India. If any country which has to have a policy, it has got to be based on its national interests. Now, we have two countries involved here. One is the US and the European countries. With US, we have the maximum business. We have the common vision. We have common interests in the Asia Pacific. And with Russia, we have very old relations which are very trustworthy. So it's very difficult for us to take side. And we have to see that we also don't push Russia into the hands of China by going on to the side of the European nations and the American side. So for that reason, we have to take a stance which is neutral and which is reasonable. And I think Indian Prime Minister yesterday spoke to President Putin and made it very clear that there must be a restraint and there should be no violence. And we must stop the violence. So I think India has taken a very reasonable stand. And more than this should not be expected from India.
Okay, you're making an important point. India must put its national interests first. Weapon systems like the S-400 General which are imperative for India's defense against China, who Edward seems to think we side with, which is totally wrong, are coming only from Russia. For example, the nuclear submarine that India has, again, only being supplied by Russia. Countries like America could potentially supply some of these high-end weapon systems, but for their security reasons would never do, and therefore India needs to make tough calls and needs to make them regardless of what the rest of the world thinks.
Yes, Rahul, we have more than 50% of our equipment of the ground forces from Russia. And as you mentioned, we got a submarine from them. So we have to take care on these things, because you cannot stop your supplies midway through. And of course, these are the problems which I must also mention one thing, and I'm not trying to take any sides. When the Cold War ended, there were 16 countries from the ex-erstwhile Soviet Union which joined the NATO. And now there are 30 countries. And that was one understanding in the Cold War, that the NATO will not be expanded and it will not threaten Russia's security. So when Russia talks of their security and shows that as their major interest, I think we must understand their position also.
Oh, absolutely. And what this battle between Ukraine and Russia is showing is that when a country like Russia attacks, you're really on your own. And that's the message to India as well. When you're up against China, you're on your own. If you think that Uncle Sam's going to come and help you, or that London will come to your aid, that won't happen. Fight your own battle. That is the reality of the New World Order. We've got live perspectives at this time from Moscow, from Odessa in Ukraine, from Washington, D.C., from London, and from New Delhi. And I continue this special program on the other side of a very quick break. You're watching India Today's live and continuing coverage of Russia's invasion of Ukraine.